Deputy President. Well, this bill amends the Higher Education Support Act to give effect to several measures from the Australian Universities Accord final report. These measures include changing the way help indexation is calculated to use the lower of either the Consumer Price Index or the Wage Price Index backdated to the 2023 and 24 indexation years, the introduction of a Commonwealth prac payment for teaching, nursing, midwifery and social work students, free-fee uni-ready courses for students to undertake preparatory courses to prepare for university studies, and a requirement for universities to provide 40% of the student services and amenities fee to student-led organisations. This bill also lists Adelaide University as a Table A provider, which will support the merger of the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide. While the Coalition does support this bill, we are proposing several amendments, which I will discuss in due course. But fundamentally, Acting Deputy President, we do raise very serious concerns about Labor's way in which it has imposed such a massive impost on student debt for 3 million Australians. So the Education Minister, Mr Clare, has talked a very big game on the support mechanisms for students, but we do raise concerns about the deficient way in which this government is in fact supporting students in practice. So while escalating student debt is a direct consequence of Labor's high inflation and economic mismanagement, the bill, as I mentioned, is proposing to change help indexation to the lower of WPI or CPI, but it's very important not to gloss over what has happened and what Labor is trying to do, because under Labor, help indexation has risen by almost 16%, 3.9% on the 1st of June 2022, 7.1% on the 1st of June 23 and 4.7% on the 1st of June 24. So for someone with an average loan of $24,700 as at June 22, this has meant a crippling increase of around $4,000. And it's very important to contrast that with the average annual indexation of just 1.7%, which occurred under the former Coalition government. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, this government can attempt to rewrite history, but 3 million Australians will never forget what has happened to them under this government. Student debt is out of control. And let's not forget that there are many young Australians who are struggling just to pay the rent or put food on the table. So while this bill changes how help indexation is recalculated and backdates that indexation formula, let's not forget that this still means an increase in student debt of 11.1%. So in the face of Labor's cost of living crisis, this is still a kick in the guts for struggling students and the 3 million Australians with a student loan. And the other really important point to make, to counter Labor's false narrative about delivering refunds of some $3 billion, most students will not see a refund, as Labor is trying to suggest. And that, of course, provides no cost of living relief. That is because, for most students, there will be a rebate applied against each person's help loan account, which, of course, will be eroded over time by reason of future indexation, depending on how long it ultimately takes to pay off the debt. So, of the 3 million Australians, it's estimated to be only about 200,000 who will actually receive a refund, and that refund will be contingent on any other Commonwealth debts which are owing and which, of course, need to be cleared before cash will be back in the bank. And, of course, the fact that the government is talking about refunds and cash in the bank is also ridiculous because we don't know when this is going to occur. We have for many months sought details. When will this rebate be applied, or refund, or reduction? And we are none the wiser. But what we do know is that the claims that the government is making, that they wipe $3 billion in student debt, is also very misleading. I mean, under Labor, indexation has gone up by a staggering $8.1 billion. So this is all smoke and mirrors from this government to try and cover up the absolute mess it has made of help debt because of the fact that Labor has mismanaged the economy. It has kept inflation higher for longer, and that's had a very, very detrimental impact on all Australians, including, of course, Australians with a help debt. Of course, recognising the mess that the Albanese government has made of student debt in this country since the election, the government has also announced several other student debt policies, being lifting the help debt repayment threshold and lowering the minimum repayment to $450 a year. And of course, as we've made very clear, this could lead to a lifetime of debt, and we've raised serious concerns about that. And of course, the government has also made an election commitment of some discount of 20% to student debt for all debtors, which is a policy reeking in unfairness and elitism. Because, as we know, under that policy, the people who are going to get the most out of it are just 55,000 people who have a help debt of between $100,000 and $200,000, meaning under this policy Labor would effectively deliver them an average paycheck of $25,000. But of course, 3 million people may receive this discount. First of all, Labor's not serious about this policy, otherwise it would have brought this legislation forward in this parliament. So this is nothing more than an election bribe. But what does it say to all those hard-working Australians, the millions of hard-working Australians who've paid off their help debt? What does it say to the fact that this is going to cost $16 billion in terms of the hit to the bottom line, $1,600 for every household? And what does it say to all Australians who've seen collapsing living standards and their disposable incomes collapse also under Labor? And I remind the chamber of what the leading economist Chris Richardson said. Handing $16 billion to graduates is a reverse Robin Hood. It's a tax cut targeted to the big end of town, with money going from the less well-off to the better off. So this is grossly unfair. This is reeking in elitism, and this just sums up what this government is all about. I will just make the point that Labor has imposed the most horrific cost of living impost on all Australians, driving up the cost of food by 12%, health costs up 10%, education up 12%, electricity up a staggering 31%, gas up a staggering 34%, housing up 13%, rents are up 16%. So this government is just tinkering at the edges and nothing more. The bill, as I mentioned, also makes provision for Commonwealth prac payments for students studying teaching, nursing, midwifery or social work, and they, of course, work enormously hard, but there is enormous uncertainty about this payment. The universities have, in fact, raised serious concerns about this. It will be delivered not via Centrelink, but through a grant bucket, and then the universities will need to seek payments from that grant bucket. There's been very little or no consultation with state and territory governments or the industry as to how this measure will be implemented, and we are deeply concerned about the lack of consultation And of course, we learned during the committee hearing and in the Senate hearing process that there's no details to which students will be eligible, how they will be means tested, or in fact how and when they will receive this prac payment. So as a result of the enormous uncertainty, the Coalition will pursue a substantive amendment requiring the government to table the eligibility and means test requirements for the Commonwealth prac payment before the new grant payment can commence. And importantly, this will provide transparency ahead of the payment commencing to ensure students and the providers who will be accessing student applications understand the requirements before the payment begins. Without clear eligibility guidelines, students remain in the dark about this payment. We also, of course, the bill also, as I mentioned, includes provisions in relation to the delivery of free fee university courses. We have raised a number of concerns in relation to that now, because at the moment, under the enabling places which already exist, students can study right now and at no cost. And while providers will receive a higher base funding rate per place, being some $18,278, the loss of enabling funding will mean an overall reduction of funding for students who need additional support. So again, there's been some concerns raised about the way that the government has changed the availability of enabling courses, which were very much directed to particular courses and offered to students to support them kickstart their university studies. We are also particularly concerned about the requirement in this bill that a minimum of the 40% of the student services and amenities fee revenue be directed to student-led organisations, including student associations, unions and guilds. This is concerning, and for that reason we have brought forward and we will be introducing an amendment, and this amendment seeks to remove the 40% allocation requirement to allow universities the flexibility to distribute these funds in ways that best meets the needs of all students, rather than prioritising student-led unions. The universities have also raised concerns about this. There are some transition provisions in this bill, but we don't think that they're strong enough. And this is also a measure directing this additional money to support student-led organisations, which is driven more by ideology than common sense, because a lot of smaller universities don't have well-established student-led organisations which can deliver the sorts of support that students need. And that support is really, really important. That support is critical to give students the support they need, whether it's legal advice, whether it's advice, health advice, mental health advice and support. And as I say, we are concerned that this provision is all about supporting student unions to run their activities, and in particular, if the amendment fails to separate out and vote against this allocation, we are proposing to safeguard these funds from being used for student elections, student protests or protest-related activities, to ensure these resources directly benefit student welfare and essential services. We have heard anecdotally a number of instances when student-led organisations have used monies held by them for what I regard as improper purposes, and it's very, very important that we have this safeguard, because otherwise this is a mandate that's ideologically driven and overlooks critical concerns raised by universities about the misuse of funds. So we are seeking the support of the Senate to support that amendment to make sure that student support funds are used properly to support students and not for other improper activities such as student protests and the like. Thank you.
Before we sit down, Senator Henderson, the second reading amendment, if you could just formally move that, please. Just say I formally move.
Yes, I formally move the second reading
Excellent.
amendment.
Thank you.